come to a vote? Yes, right in the front here.
Mr. Moderator, I have an amendment, if I may hand it to you. Hold on. So after the first words select board, add the phrase subject to town meeting approval.
I'm not going to accept it.
I don't.
And let me explain why, okay? I have serious scope issues. I had no time to research it because it came on the floor, and it is my prerogative as a moderator to say I will not accept an amendment. I'm talking. I will not accept amendment of this significance where I feel there might be scope issues coming from the floor of town meeting. So I am rejecting this motion.
Mr. Moderator, may I explain why it's completely within the scope?
Excuse me. I believe she asked me that question, and the answer is no, because it's only partially a scope issue, and the other part of it is receiving a motion at the last minute on the floor of this significance, and I am not going to accept it. I'm sorry. Is there a point of order?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, I understand you have broad scope of rulings in town meeting, but it strikes me as outside your powers to suggest that we cannot make motions within the scope of the article that on the floor of town meeting, that we have to prepare in advance when we might want to make a motion in response to what's been going on. It is way outside your rights or powers to limit that town meeting to that extent. So either rule on it purely as a matter of scope or allow it to go forward.
If I have to be put on the spot, I will rule it out of scope.
I think
Sorry.
I think I should be allowed to explain why it's completely within the scope.
I'm sorry, but no. I've made a ruling, and we're done with it.
I'm going to speak.
I'm sorry, but the answer is no. I've made a ruling.
I'd like to speak for 3 minutes. Since I was called
you can't
on.
Because you have.
Since I was called on, I would like to speak for 3 minutes.
Okay, but you're not speaking to a motion because there is no motion on the floor.
You may change your mind after I speak. Could you please put the overhead on? I'm showing you the Cushman Market parallel tax incentive that was passed in 2006. You see the language highlighted, subject to town meeting approval. This very same tax incentive that we all thought was a great idea for Cushman Market, and I still believe, I agree with Mr. Weiss completely. I was very proud to be in town meeting when we passed that, and it had that language, I cut and pasted this, subject to town meeting approval. This is important because, as John Fox said, we want to make sure this is an appropriate tax benefit. This is one surefire way to make sure that it will be appropriate because it would have to come back to us. It's completely within the scope of tax incentives since it was exactly the language in 2006. I would also point out that the Cushman Market tax incentive was very different. It was over a 4-year period. This is over a 10-year period. It was very graduated and made perfect sense. There were no taxes the first year. There were 25% taxes the next year, 50% the next, 75% the next, and by the 4th year they were at 100% taxes. This is over 10 years, starting with potentially 20,000 was the example. Over 10 years, even if it's weaned down, we're still talking about hundreds of thousands of tax dollars. But I urge the moderator to now reconsider whether it's within the scope to make an amendment to be identical to the language of the tax incentive of 2006. I asked for that reconsideration to include this amendment.
So let me explain my feelings on this. First of all, I understand very much what Mr. Oldham said, and I don't feel I'm saying I'm never going to accept any motion from the floor if I haven't been warned in advance. I don't feel that's been my policy, and I've been doing that. But I am being put on the spot to decide whether this is in scope. And scope, there's a couple different aspects of it. One is, are we increasing something or making something different than making something more difficult than what is promised by the warrant article, something that's, and yet, how do I express this? It would be out of scope in one aspect if I felt that we were making the requirements less stringent. And this isn't. This is making them more stringent. However, another scope issue has to do with warning to town meeting. And that's what the definition of a warrant. And there was no warning to town meeting that this deliberative body would be included in the tax incentive. It's a brand new piece of it.
Point of order.
And no, there's no, let me finish talking, okay, please. And I may be right, I may be wrong, I don't know. And that's my point that I was telling you. If you put me on the spot, I have to decide. And I am deciding that it is out of scope.
Point of order?
Yes, what's your point of order?
My point of order is that the town meeting rules allow amendments from the floor. Amendments from the floor always mean they're not part of the warrant. You can't make a new rule to say that amendments from the floor are not allowed. As for the amendment not being allowed if it's more restrictive, that's exactly what the Fox Amendment was. Amendments by their nature are either more restrictive or less restrictive. We're not allowed to only amend in the favor of the planning board proposal. We're allowed to be more restrictive. I'd urge you to reconsider. I think this is appropriate as an amendment.
I'm sorry, but I'm not reconsidering, and we're at the end of the discussion. I'm sorry.
I urge you to vote no.